I welcome you all to today's masterclass on a complete beginner's guide to retrofit. This is a retrofit information, support and expertise event fully funded by Department for Energy Security and Net Zero delivered by Turner& and Townsend. Today we have the lovely Megan Creswell, who's a senior consultant at Turner& and Townsend, who will be delivering the presentation. And yeah, now it's time for me to hand it over to Megan, who's going to take it up from here. Thank you.
Thanks, Varsha. Welcome, everyone. It's great to see so many people in August on this masterclass. So thanks for attending. So yeah, thanks, Varsha, for the introduction. My name's Megan Creswell. Some of you might have seen me previously. I've been at Turner& Townsend for more than 3 years now, delivering our kind of housing sustainability retrofit team, working on RISE. I am this a supply chain lead. So yeah, we have an element of supply chain support. So providing kind of learning and development through that, but work very closely with our grant recipient support team as well. And then previously I worked at a housing association delivering retrofit for about 6 years before I came to TNT. So yeah, today's session is, I think most of the sessions in August we're delivering a kind of back to basics. So this is very much a basic introduction to retrofit. So if you feel like this might be a bit beginner for you, please do kind of feel free to leave and see what else we've got on offer in August or going forwards. But yeah, hopefully this is the kind of right context for you. And yeah, as Varsha said, please feel free to put questions in the chat or ask anything at the end. Happy to take anything. If I can't answer it, we'll take it away and get back to you as well. So today's agenda is kind of going over the basics of retrofit, as I said. So what is housing retrofit, the different kind of options available, how we measure energy efficiency, key terms, roles and responsibility, and a bit on retrofit strategy as well. So just to provide a bit of context and background about why we are doing retrofit, what the purpose for us all doing this is. I don't know about the slides, but I think I think they will be available. And also I think this is recorded, so it'll go onto our website as well. But yeah, I'm pretty sure the slides are shared as well, but Vash will be able to say about that at the end. So business, what's wrong with business as usual? Why do we need to retrofit our housing stock? The two kind of main reasons fall into supporting residents, so those that are in fuel poverty. So fuel poverty occurs when a household cannot afford to keep their home adequately warm. This is often due to a combination of low income, high energy costs, which is the measurement in England at the moment, the Lilly definition. So that kind of based on income, and then also the EPC banding. If your EPC banding is D or below, and that comes into that category. In the UK, millions of households are affected by fuel poverty, which can lead to severe health issues and even deaths. Obviously, kind of lots of big knock-on impacts of the impact of fuel poverty. The second bit is around the climate, impacting the climate crisis, which I think we can all see at the moment, rising temperatures, wildfires, but also kind of floods and stuff across the world we're seeing. So housing contributes significantly to greenhouse gas emissions, primarily through the use of fossil fuels for heating and hot water. Retrofitting homes to improve energy efficiency can drastically reduce these emissions. So they're kind of the two main factors that we feel we need to be addressed to prevent those impacts, but also where we're going wrong with kind of carrying on as business as usual. There are, of course, kind of other reasons why you would look to retrofit. Lots of other reasons might come into your strategy, which we'll discuss later. One of the main things is that we can't, obviously, the majority of existing housing is going to be what's around in the next 30 to 50 years. The amount of homes and, high quality new build homes we're building is well below kind of target in terms of housing people in the UK. So we need to make sure our existing stock is fit for purpose. And we'll come on to some of the reasons in a bit. But yeah, these are kind of the purposes that go towards potentially building your strategy around reasonings to do retrofit. But hopefully most of you have already had these arguments with your senior leadership, and it's quite easy to get those across now. It's interesting, we talk obviously a lot about fuel poverty. And I think, we've seen, particularly from a warm June, July, that things like overheating are becoming more of an issue. So the climate impacts that we're seeing from global warming are going to become kind of more of an issue. So we focus a lot on improving energy efficiency in this, but it is worth considering things like cooling and ventilation, making sure the homes are fit for the future and looking at climate adaptation as well where that's applicable. So just a bit of context and background. This figure changes slightly, probably between about 23 and 26% I've seen, but residential properties are responsible for 23% of the UK's carbon emissions. That source came from the Energy Saving Trust. And the biggest factor for these emissions comes from domestic heating, which makes up 3/4 of the carbon. As you can see from the graph on the right, we have among the oldest and least efficient housing stock in Europe. If you equalise external temperatures, the average UK home loses more heat than others. We have obviously a lot of homes now that are kind of over 100 years old, pre-war stuff, which there's obviously been made a lot of improvements on, but still a long way to go, which we'll see from some of the EPC stats in the later slides. And many homes are inefficient and have poor or no insulation and are very drafty. They allow hot air to leave faster and cool air to enter. So generally, occupants must heat their homes for longer. This negatively impacts environment and living standards. So generally, emissions are wasted in these situations. Building from scratch is not necessarily better. So a key point is that there are 27 million existing homes in the UK, so it's simply not feasible to rebuild them. And we also need to consider, as I said earlier, overheating and adaptation to climate change when we are reviewing our retrofit options. So basically, what is housing retrofit? So retrofit is just a term which is used to describe the process of making changes to existing buildings. So it can be used in a non-domestic setting as well to reduce energy consumption and associated emissions. And yeah, quite often the term retrofit isn't really widely used, particularly amongst residents. It doesn't often really mean anything. So it might be that you kind of look to use other words that resonate well with people. Things like, reducing your fuel bills, saving money on bills, energy efficiency, carbon reduction, energy savings. So it's all kind of the same thing, although retrofit, it does encompass it very well. And as I said, we focus a lot here around reducing energy and carbon, but we also need to consider now cooling, ventilation, climate adaptation where required. So what is the point in retrofit? So on the left, these are kind of where we want to be. The end result is that you provide homes that residents want to live in. And this is achieved through providing homes with affordable bills, increased comfort, the homes that meet regulatory compliance. And hopefully you're all aware there's quite a lot of consultations going on with the Decent Home Standard, the minimum energy efficiency standards, the fuel poverty standard is being reviewed. So there's quite a lot of compliance which impacts kind of energy efficiency retrofit that's coming forward relatively quickly. EPC reform as well as another one. So yeah, you can get ahead of the game now if we start retrofitting homes, but one to consider when you're thinking about the future and your strategy as well. It links nicely into future-proofing your homes. So maybe not just thinking about getting to that EPCC, but thinking about the net zero emissions targets as well, reducing health risks and lowering emissions. So there's kind of like different impact to it. I suppose if you look, that there's the kind of social, economic and environmental. You could maybe rank it in order of priority. And from my perspective, potentially social impacts comes first. So looking at reducing health risk, reducing those impacts from damp and mold, obviously with our Web's law coming in to play this year as well, that will obviously significantly impact your retrofit program and the works that are going on in homes. So again, it might prioritise some of those homes that might not necessarily fall into your priority list straight away. So yeah, that's kind of all that compliance stuff. It's worth reviewing if you haven't already. So those are the kind of positives of retrofit. And you want to stay away from obviously things like fuel poverty, cold and damp, non-compliance, unsafe homes when looking at the kind of Decent Home Standard, increased health risks and wasted energy as well. So it's all the rubbish that, we don't want to see. People don't want to live in those homes. Lots of kind of media around issues with living in cold, unsafe homes. So we all know it's for the right cause. It's obviously just how we go about doing it and what the right order of kind of retrofit and making improvements is, which we come on nicely to looking at housing retrofit options. So this doesn't list everything, but this is probably kind of the main measures that we see going into homes. So obviously you've got your fabric measures, your insulation works. So your cavity wall insulation, that will generally be on a retrofit basis. So where a home's previously had it and needs redoing, either that will normally be on kind of a solid wall or a non-traditional home where there's no existing insulation in the walls. Same with IWI as well. Your loft or standard roof insulation, they're probably kind of the main measures that we see. Underfloor, I think, is quite significantly needed in the UK housing stock, but something that's still relatively difficult to tackle. And I know there's kind of been lots of technologies trialed and stuff, but still seems like that measure is something that is kind of limited application at the moment. Move on to kind of heating, so looking at improving kind of the efficiencies of what's currently there. That can be as basic as just kind of heating controls, and then kind of the high heat retention storage heaters as well, which are available as long as they are in kind of small dwellings or properties where a heat pump wouldn't be suitable for the Warm Homes programme. Windows and doors, so generally they need to have a SAP improvement related to them where you're putting them in. I don't think many homes still have single glazing, so it would be probably a swap to double. So you're going to make sure that there is going to be an improvement by putting those in. Same with the energy efficient doors as well. Basic things like lighting and kind of hot water cylinders and the thermostats and water cylinder jackets, which are reviewed separately under the new RD-SAP now, so they potentially have a more significant impact on SAP. And then the kind of the final thing is to look at obviously low carbon heating and renewables and micro generation, so solar PV. Heat pumps, some people still might consider solar water heating and energy and battery storage as well, which is again eligible under RD-SAP 10. So hopefully some of you are including that in your Warm Homes programs. The final thing is kind of touch on ventilation. There's been some changes to requirements for ventilation under the new PAS 2035-2023 standard. So worth kind of getting your head around that a little bit. But yeah, basically any home that has retrofit works done needs to assess ventilation. Any properties that have got kind of existing damp mold that has to be addressed first, or any repairs, remedial works that need to be done will need to be done before you retrofit. And generally, best practice is to install the ventilation before you carry out any other measures, mostly due to kind of resident refusals and access issues. If you're to install your solar PV, it's sometimes quite difficult to then get back in to do the ventilation. There's still quite negative views on it. So it'd be quite interesting to hear if anyone's had some kind of positive success stories around ventilation and how they've, managed to bring the customers on board with that. Generally, PAS would recommend the mechanical ventilation or demand controlled ventilation. Background ventilation is required to things like trickle vents on windows and doors, and you've got your door undercuts to consider as well. So there is quite a lot under PAS to consider with ventilation, and it can increase the cost of the retrofit works as well, because ventilation doesn't actually get lodged, and sometimes it doesn't have any SAP improvements. So yeah, worth considering that when you're kind of thinking about your options and costs and stuff like that. So yeah, just some pictures, examples of retrofit interventions. Hopefully some of you have seen these before. So the underfloor insulation one is actually someone rolling out layers of insulation, which I've not actually ever seen done before. But yeah, that is an option, but obviously very costly and not really able to do with a resident in situ. So probably only able to do when the property's empty. Heat pumps, obviously most people should be aware of these now. Air source heat pumps generally kind of the more favourable just due to kind of cost and ease of installation. There is under Warm Homes, there kind of is a push on low carbon heat, and also an extra incentive for homes that are on the gas grid to have a heat pump. So it'll be really interesting to see how those go down and how well they go down with the residents as well when they're moving from gas boilers to heat pumps, how that monitoring and kind of ongoing checks on bills and stuff goes. Image on the right is EWI, solar PV. Someone looks like they're cleaning it, which is a useful thing. And actually it's quite a good image in terms of thinking about retrofit, not just as a kind of one stop, you put it on and then you leave. It's all got to be properly maintained and the service going forward. So you've got to consider that with any works that go on. If you're bringing in a contractor just to do the installation, who's going to carry on the servicing maintenance of that kind of technology? Even with installation, it only has kind of a lifetime of, 20, 25 years. So it needs to be considered as part of your kind of like asset cyclical maintenance almost. And those dates and all the documentation, information guarantees stored on your asset management systems. MVHR, we wouldn't generally do this on a retrofit just because it's quite a lot of work involved, but you would quite often see that on new build properties. I think most retrofit is probably the DMEVs, so extract fans in the kind of wet rooms, and then trickle vents and door undercuts is probably more widely used. So just covering how we actually measure energy efficiency. So again, this is quite high level and doesn't go into too much detail, but generally, these are the ways that we measure energy efficiency in the UK, and there's still kind of the government standards for how they want to see it assessed as part of the government funding schemes. So the energy performance certificates, EPCs, are still the main target for kind of domestic retrofit in the UK. This is being looked at and reviewed at the moment. So there's an EPC reform in consultation. I think the consultation is closed actually, which if you haven't had a look at it, it would be useful to review, because it's going to potentially have quite significant impact. A very big move away from kind of using certificates and ratings, and instead you'd move towards kind of factors that are in the property and how they kind of interact with the different components that are in the home. The standard assessment procedure, which is the methodology to assess and compare the energy and environmental performance of buildings. So SAP is generally used to calculate the performance of a new property. In retrofit, we tend to use reduced standard assessment procedure, so RDSAP, just because it would be quite impossible to do a full SAP on properties where people are living, because you'd have to kind of rip up floors and find out every detail about the property, which wouldn't be easy with someone in situ. So yeah, RDSAP just looks at slightly less calculations than SAP, but pulls off the same reading, which produces an energy performance certificate, which provides you with a rating from A, which is very efficient, to G, which is very inefficient. There was changes to SAP and SAP recently, so we've moved from RDSAP version 9.94, which is called RDSAP 12, to RDSAP 10, and that was in June. So it just takes into account kind of the different carbon variations in the kind of UK electricity network, and it brings in various different performances for certain measures. As I said, things like the hot water cylinders and battery storage kind of makes it eligible under SAP. There's a bit on cooling as well on SAP. I think it brings in external shutters, which is quite interesting. You might see them a lot in kind of Southern Europe for, to provide cooling during the day. And that's actually a measure under RDSAP 10 now, which would be interesting to see how that gets implemented. As you're probably aware, EPCs are not perfect, and they're widely regarded as inaccurate in calculation. And the advice given for improvement measures would be worth reviewing the EPC reform that's closed for consultation. However, it's still the standard, and it does provide a lot of useful information, and it's useful to show the difference of what was there before and where you can get to as well. Mixed with the retrofit assessment, which is just a slightly more advanced. They do an energy report, but they also do a condition report and a occupancy assessment, which is really useful to see, because it actually brings into life how the occupant that's living there is using their property. So you can make kind of changes to the required measures based on who's using what. If they're using a lot of hot water, for example, you might put in a bit bigger cylinder or something to take into account that occupancy assessment. The other way of measuring energy efficiency, and again, this is government endorsed, is to use the passive house planning package. I don't know if I have not seen anyone use this, but it's possible. And so it's a generally adopted for passive house and low energy building projects. So that would be kind of major retrofit or new build. And it calculates requirements for heating, cooling, primary energy demand. And again, that probably links there slightly to the EPC reform, moving towards those kind of requirements around like heat demand, rather than looking at a certificate in time. So at the moment, by law, current rental properties need to have a minimum E rating by 2028. And all rental properties will need a minimum C rating by 2030. Which is what's in the new MEES, both for the private sector and the social housing sector as well. So that's in consultation at the moment. So again, if you haven't had a look, and if you're part of one of those organisations, it's worth having a response to those consultations. Quite significant changes to kind of minimum investment required, particularly on the private sector side. So big kind of changes for landlords coming up. So these images showing, the one on the left is just kind of how EPC bands in England categorised, As you can see, we've still got more than 60% of UK homes are rated D or lower, although there's no date on this, so that might have changed. So yeah, still a significant way to go to get to that target of 2030. We've got 5 years. Obviously, it's not all going to be achievable, but hopefully we can get as many of those up to a better standard as we can. On the right, that shows a snip of a PHPP verification sheet, which kind of shows the breakdown of space heating, cooling, and the primary energy demand, which is built into the Passive House standard package. Generally, houses with a C rating or higher are more comfortable for occupants, and also there's some figures around selling those houses for more, which can be up to 16%. And essentially, there's some figures around running costs per EPC band as well, which are useful to look at. But it will be very much dependent on obviously the end user and how they're using their home and heating their home as well. So some of the key retrofit terms you might have heard of: fabric first and whole house retrofit. So fabric first approach first reduces heat demand by making sure the fabric or building envelope, the walls, roof, floors, windows and doors are optimized for thermal efficiency. For example, they're well insulated. Only then should heating be upgraded to non-fossil sources and renewables like PV battery added. So this is the general approach, and I think this has probably been the approach for the last kind of 20 years. So quite a lot of insulation has been carried out in the UK. But as I said earlier, it's something that needs to be considered on kind of a cyclical basis, particularly with things like cavity wall insulation. If you're using kind of mineral fibres or wool, the insulation will drop over time. So it will need kind of reblowing, potential extractions of any rubble in the cavity. It's just something that is worth kind of feeding into your maintenance plans and reviewing those properties every kind of 25 years. Check there's no issues. If there's any concerns with kind of damp and mold patches, it might be worth getting a boroscope assessment done on those properties. So yeah, it's something that should be looked at on an ongoing basis. A lot of insulation was done probably 20 years ago, so it might even need to be redone again. There is kind of a slight move away from fabric first, I think, of the new guidance in the Warm Homes programme. There's obviously a big push for low carbon heat. As we electrify the grid, we're looking towards that electrification mix of our heating, move away from fossil fuels. But I think majority of housing, particularly in the social housing sector, have generally well insulated properties, so that should now be ready for heat pumps. Obviously there's some more tricky homes where hopefully you're going to tackle both, but there is kind of that move away to potentially doing one before the other now. So I suppose the look towards whole house retrofit, and that actually comes into quite a lot of the new PAS 2023 standard. All homes need kind of full data analysis and a whole house retrofit plan. In a perfect world, each home would have all the measures they need undertaken in one go, but where this isn't possible, the measures just need to be sequenced appropriately to ensure there are no unintended consequences. So this is what your retrofit coordinator will pull together for the project, for that house. They'll pull together a plan that follows that kind of order of importance in terms of what the sequence of works that needs to be done to the property. I think, one of the major things is if you put in, we saw 20 years ago, before PAS came about, people putting in insulation potentially without an adequate ventilation strategy, which actually can have knock-on effects and can result in damp and black and mold and, having to redo works where you spent a lot of money, but also obviously having that resident there with problems in their home. Whole house retrofit also has benefits in terms of the resident, and potentially you can sequence the works in a really logical order so that you can get them all done kind of in a week or 2 weeks to provide that minimal disruption, so you're not going back every year or every couple of months to carry out the works. Obviously in an ideal world that is how it would work, and I appreciate it's not always that easy with having different contractors to do different works, but that's just kind of another benefit of it. Sometimes when things like windows and doors aren't due for replacement for 5 years, that's fine. You can just factor them into the plan in the longer term. I think the whole house, the medium term improvement plan is a 30-year plan. So as long as everything's factored into that 30 years, then that's fine. So it should pretty much cover every component in the property. So they're the kind of two main retrofit terms, but there's lots of others. As I said, that kind of move towards low carbon heat is going to be a push, and kind of micro generation of electricity through PV and battery storage as well. So these are a bit more kind of technical retrofit terms. So air infiltration, Air flows through gaps in the building fabric, for example, cracks at windows, surrounds, and between wall floor junctions. A simple example here is an ill-fitting old front door where you can feel the cold air getting in. So perhaps your budget prioritises other measures than a new firmly efficient door. So a quick fix would be a draft excluder to reduce that air infiltration. You don't want to... I've seen it a few times with old EWI installed, 20 years ago, where they've done the EWI, but they've not done the windows, and then there's massive gaps around the windows, which will just cause air to escape. So yeah, that's again, that kind of links that back to why you want to look at the whole house. And I think PAS now pretty much drives forward doing all those improvements, like your windows, your doors, at the same time as your EWI and any other measures that are needed. Make sure it's kind of airtight as possible. Thermal bypass is very similar to thermal bridging, but it refers to air movement through or around insulation, so effectively bypassing its purposes and reducing its performance. So this is slightly probably more niche, and this could be where things like insulation have been installed incorrectly. It could be that it's wind driven, so if you've got properties that are coastal or very rural, that can it could be impacted by like weather conditions. Worth getting probably thermal imaging cameras done on those properties to see if there are any issues over the winter with thermal bypass. It would increase heat loss, and it could cause mold growth due to air movement across and behind insulation. So thermal bridging, this is probably one of the most known terms when it comes to kind of air leakage and unwanted heat loss. So it is referred to as cold bridging. So it's an area of a building that has higher level of thermal transmittance than surrounding materials. It therefore lets more cold in. So yeah, again, this thermal imaging camera will be able to show you where these are. There are obviously naturally higher areas of heat loss in a property, which you can try and limit as much as possible. But kind of naturally, the materials are better conductors of heat. They will form a bridge between the inner and the outer face of construction. So this commonly happens when there is a gap in the insulation layer, or where an element such as a joist penetrates through the construction. So as I said, like quite often where the cavity wall insulation drops, you'll get a thermal bridge potentially in patches, and residents might see kind of patches of mold or damp on the wall where that's occurring. So in terms of thermal bridging, why does it matter? Heat will always try to find the path of least resistance through a space. As we insulate buildings to a higher level, thermal bridges can become a significant source of heat loss, accounting for as much as 30% of total losses. This can undermine the work completed to insulate a property and contribute to the performance gap between the expected and actual energy demand of the building. Additionally, as the inner surface of a construction where a bridge occurs will be cooler than the surrounding area, it can allow condensation to form, potentially damaging the surface or leading to mold growth, which can present health risks. So thermal bridging can be quite common before you carry out any retrofit works, but it can also be enhanced once the works have been completed, because actually you're making areas warmer, and if you've got any cold spots, you're more likely to get these bridging effects happen. So it's really key to make sure that any retrofit works you're completing are being done to the right standard, and there's none of these issues that can occur further down the line. So kind of goes over a few roles and responsibilities here, but we're starting with what happens when retrofit goes wrong. So I mentioned earlier, we've probably seen a lot of these pictures. So example one is EWI that was poorly fitted around the guttering and the windows, allowing moisture to saturate the insulation and eventually cause damage to the interior surfaces, causing black mold and fungal growth. That one is quite extreme. I think that's quite a well-known case study where 300 homes were insulated with EWI and then found to be uninhabitable due to what is going on in that property. And it cost a lot of money to rectify and make good, and also obviously impacted the lives of those residents negatively. Example two is water ingress into the cavity. So it's not been spotted during an initial survey and in the installation. So yeah, defective cavity wall insulation that caused damp and mold in thousands of properties. So it's really making sure that those initial surveys are done correctly. And that's what a big thing of PAS is, making sure kind of all those works and remedial works are rectified first before you carry out any further retrofit measures. This last example is of water ingress between the existing wall and the external wall insulation due to poor installation. It looks like it's literally caused a hole in the wall there. And again, this was 104 homes that were rendered damp and uninhabitable due to inappropriate use of EWI. So, I mean, a lot of these will be relatively historic now, but unfortunately we are still seeing issues with particularly installation measures in the industry, which is where the PAS standard and where, making sure your retrofit coordinator carries out their handover checks, alongside the contractors really well and follows that process the way they should with Trustmark as well. Trustmark will do a review on properties, but obviously they can't get out to every home. So it's probably a good idea to get a kind of a quantity surveyor or some kind of a retrofit surveyor to do extra assessments alongside the retrofit coordinator to ensure kind of that handover and any issues are rectified straight away by the contractors. So yeah, just carrying on kind of what I was just speaking about to ensure quality. So tenant protection. Retrofits must meet tenants' needs with a mechanism in place to report issues. So yeah, the kind of role of the resident liaison officer is really, really key. And again, the retrofit coordinator has the oversight of the whole process. So any issues as well with the tenant, they need to take that on board and feed that into the retrofit plan. Advice and guidance, so access to impartial advice, providing comprehensive information about existing and future measures, skills and training, making sure your team and whoever is carrying out the works or is involved in the project has filled any knowledge gaps. So obviously that's coming to some of these RISE sessions, additional qualifications and training as well. Ensuring people from all stages of the retrofit process are upskilled appropriately. Following robust standards, so as I said quite a lot, PAS 2035, Trustmark, MCS standards, the PAS 2030 for the installers as well, and also some of those compliance and enforcement measures we talked about coming in for, some are already in place already, but there's quite a lot of change on the horizon in terms of compliance coming in. So yeah, ensuring that quality will support and will go a long way in supporting the kind of the customer and the tenant as well. So yeah, I've mentioned it quite a lot, so apologies if you don't know PAS 2035, but hopefully most of you are aware of it. It's the British standard for retrofitting dwellings. It was first published in 2019, so it hasn't been in place that long. It was revised in 2023, and then it's been revised again this year. The standard outlines how retrofit projects should be managed and delivered. And then PAS 2030 is the British standard for the installation, commissioning and handover of energy efficiency measures. So that's the bit that the installer has to have in order to install measures under the framework of PAS 2035. So yeah, there's quite a lot to it really, and we run additional masterclasses and sessions, and there's probably lots of information on our website about PAS 2035, so it's worth getting your head around if you're new to it. But essentially those images we saw of retrofit gone wrong, that they were pre-PAS, and kind of PAS was brought in as the standard to prevent those issues. It kind of nominates a special person, the retrofit coordinator, to oversee everything in that property. They're there for quality and handover and completion. They're there on kind of behalf of the resident and the client, and they normally are kind of impartial to the contractor, so they can go back with any issues that they find as well. Yeah, as I said earlier, kind of it's a holistic approach. It considers a whole building, so the whole house retrofit, and how elements, interfaces and occupants interact. So really kind of just considers everything when you think about what's important about the home, but also the people that are living in it as well. So yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. It's doing really good stuff. Appreciate there's, costs to it, which is obviously sometimes part of the issue. But I would probably kind of feed it into your general kind of asset management system and keep and prioritize getting these done, probably even over EPCs, retrofit systems under PAS, because they do give really good indication of what's needed on those properties. Even if you can do it on an archetype basis, you do one or two properties in a street, just to understand what work's needed, even if it's in a medium-term plan. So you're looking at the 30-year life cycle, it will help go towards your kind of budgeting and stuff as well. So this is a really lovely, confusing diagram, but this is just showing how retrofit projects are delivered. So initially look at prelim consideration, project inception and engagement advice. So these happen right at the start. So yeah, sorry, this is the PAS 2035 framework for delivery. So it must be followed for a retrofit project to be compliant with PAS 2035. But yeah, as the client, obviously you're just expected to have oversight of this, but generally the retrofit coordinator will run the process and kind of manage all the roles involved in it. A detailed delivery plan will ensure that a retrofit project is delivered smoothly and successfully, helps to control timescales, budget, and helps to manage expectations with internal and external stakeholders. And there are other processes that will need to be considered in-house before engaging with the PAS process, such as reviewing housing stock and other asset data. I won't go through each step of this because there's quite a lot on there. But yeah, essentially you appoint your coordinator and all your other roles. You carry out your retrofit assessment, including any other strategy, ventilation strategies, air tightness strategies. And the coordinator will pull together the improvement option evaluation and medium-term plan, and then you'll get your retrofit designer to use that information to complete the retrofit design, then moves towards the contractor to the installation phase, commissioning handover, where again the retrofit coordinator will come in at that stage to complete the handover, and then there's ongoing monitoring, evaluation and handover advice to the resident as well. So yeah, the retrofit roles and responsibility under PAS. So you have the retrofit coordinator. So there are 5 roles defined in the PAS 2035. They all play a part in ensuring good quality retrofits that meet their intended outcomes and reduce risk of unintended outcomes. Some of these roles can perform another individual role. So the retrofit coordinator, they manage the project from start to finish. They'll be the first person you appoint. They link together each stage and they're professionally accountable for protecting the homeowner and public interests. The retrofit assessor does the assessment of the existing property and is able to produce the EPC and occupant assessment. They are required to be a domestic energy assessor, and then normally they'll do a further training to be a qualified retrofit assessor as well. The retrofit designer needs specific qualifications. Used to be that the retrofit coordinator could do quite a lot of the design, but now under the new PAS framework, they generally need specific qualifications like an architect or building engineer, bricks, that kind of thing. So that's again worth reviewing, and obviously there's potential there to increase costs of that process, and potentially they're in short demand as well. So worth getting the designer on board already if you have it. They'll provide detailed design input to ensure that correct materials and detailing is performed. They will work very closely with kind of the specialist surveyors. So like if you're looking at heat pump, they will, use the heat pump surveyor to actually, specify that design. Saying potentially with UI, they might use the specialist EWI manufacturer to provide the design. They'll just pull it all together and make sure it kind of fits with what the retrofit coordinator's plans were saying. So there is probably quite a lot of overlap and working together at that point as well. The installer is obviously the company who installs the measures. They have to be PAS 2030 accredited. And then the evaluator, they do the monitoring evaluation at the end. That could come under the retrofit coordinator role. I don't know if many people have it as a separate role, but yeah, it needs to be considered at the beginning, depending on the complexity, whether you're going to bring in an independent evaluator for that house. So yeah, that's the kind of main roles. And there's lots of ways to get into those if you are interested in kind of jobs in those. There's lots of qualifications and training available that can be done for those roles. Lots of jobs available to be done as well. Some other retrofit standards. So NFIT is a passive house equivalent for existing buildings. That specifies a significant energy reduction of 75 to 90%. Principles include increased levels of insulation, minimal thermal bridging, ventilation with heat recovery, and use of renewable energy. So that's, it's quite a major retrofit there. Lower energy retrofit guide. So the best practice approach to retrofit following fabric first and whole house principles. It specifies a minimum performance standards such as air tightness, insulation levels, and space heating demand. Monitoring and evaluation is essential to ensure outcomes are achieved. So I mentioned earlier some certification and accreditation. So all government-funded schemes have to go through Trustmark. So it's the only government-endorsed quality scheme in the UK. And as I said, it's kind of the lodgement process in terms of pulling all the documentation together for that home. But they will also carry out quality checks on homes following the works as well. And yeah, there's kind of lots of information on the Trustmark website as well. So, and we have got, again, kind of specific masterclasses and training on that side of stuff because there's quite a lot for it. The MCS, which is the microgeneration certificate scheme, this is just for low carbon and renewable technologies. So it might be kind of your engineering firms that have these to install heat pumps, solar thermal, solar PV and battery storage. And yeah, again, they will do quality checks on installs, and the surveyors as well. They'll kind of audit them every so often. Just thinking how many slides I've got left. It's all right, coming up to the last few. So yeah, lastly, I don't know if anyone's attended our kind of retrofit essentials, but the boot camp, we go through quite a lot on retrofit strategy. So if you're interested in that, then do have a look out for those. This is very high level overview. But if you haven't developed your retrofit strategy yet, then yeah, kind of have a look at this basic in terms of where you should start. So looking at preparation, you want to gain your senior level buy-in, potentially form a consortium and create a team. that project team and do kind of like a skills gap analysis within your internal team and maybe external roles as well to see what's missing and what you need to recruit for. Build a business case, that kind of thing. Data collection and analysis is vital. And as I said, if you can follow kind of the PAS approach to that data analysis and feed that into your asset management system, then that's super useful information that will be useful for 30 years. Developing retrofit interventions, planning resident engagement, building a business case. So yeah, some of those bits might come into that, but that's kind of your first step to delivering your retrofit strategy. Sustainable procurement and social value, so bringing in your procurement teams to help support with that and set the kind of company goals that you have for social value. Reviewing planning constraints, so things like listed buildings, conservation areas, areas of outstanding natural beauty don't always get kind of marked on asset management systems. I remember that being a real issue. So, making sure you identify those up front so that, when you're going to retrofit homes, you don't suddenly get a shock that actually they're in a conservation area and need additional planning requirements. Probably same actually with the building kind of safety regulations as well. So worth reviewing those as part of that. Probably set that, that whole planning thing. So is there additional requirements needed, for high-rise flats and stuff? A good understanding of PAS 2035 and what it means and what roles you might need. And then a monitoring and evaluation strategy. So a bit like your kind of resident engagement strategy, that's an ongoing plan that will be used by any project kind of delivering under the umbrella of retrofit. Delivery. So whole building assessment, benchmarking, detailed design, detailed delivery plan and installation. So that a lot of that follows the PAS 2035 framework approach. And then looking at post-retrofit, what's your handover to residents look like? What's the ongoing maintenance and servicing requirements? And also monitoring and evaluation plan as well, which some of it, again, does come into PAS, but generally that will be led by the organisation as to how long they're going to carry out evaluation, monitoring. Obviously, there's lots of technology now. And I think technology is really exciting. So, so that we don't have to potentially attend every property, can get data sensors and monitors to pick up a lot of that information. So it's worth including that in your strategy in the long term. And I think that's everything. So there's a few links here. Yeah, our website's on there. Retrofit Academy offer lots of training, so worth having a look there if you're interested in any roles. And then the BSI is the PAS 2035 standards, so worth making yourself aware of that, although it is quite a long document. So maybe have a look on the RISE website about what we've got in a shorter format. So yeah, these are on-demand resources as well. So I believe this masterclass will get uploaded like all the rest of ours. So yeah, have a look. I think they're all through YouTube. Plenty of content there to have a look at. And yeah, hopefully if you're all kind of new to retrofit, you're all excited and ready to get involved. And yeah, good luck with your projects. That's not my email address, but yeah, please do feel free to email the RISE inbox if you have any questions.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you for joining.